and welcome back for the second reading session that we're going to do, reading from our new book, Uncle Montague's Tales of Terror, which I'll just remind you is a collection of short stories, which are all quite spooky, told by the characters in the narrative. So just to have a little recap, have a go at answering these questions. Who is our narrator? Where is he? What was slightly creepy about the house? And what was the story Uncle Montague promised about? So our narrator was called Edgar, and he seemed like a posh boy because he was away at boarding school, except for the summer holidays. And he has just walked through the woods to his Uncle Montague's house, where he feels quite cut off from where he normally lives. And the house is slightly creepy for a few different reasons. And the ones that I can remember were that the knocker on the door was a half lion, half man head. And inside the house, there was no electricity or even gas to light the place. Uncle Montague only used candles. And it was very, very cold. There was even frost on the banisters sometimes. There was also a strange person called Franz, or thing called Franz, who we never see. But he mysteriously brings tea and sugar, which disappears strangely from the pot, although no one seems to eat the sugar. And the story Uncle Montague promised us was about a tree, which might not sound very scary, but it did remind me of a tree that I sometimes see on my daily walks or my runs, which is in the Nightingale Valley Woods. I always kind of wondered what the story about this tree was. If you look at this picture carefully, you can see it's a big old tree. And at the bottom, there's kind of a big sort of cavey hole, which someone has built a wall into. And I kind of wondered, why would someone build a wall into a hole in a tree? Never really thought about it, but having read this story, I wonder if there's a story about the reason this wall was here that I didn't know about before. Anyway, something for you to think about. Maybe you could visit if you get to go out on some daily walks down the Nightingale Valley, which isn't very far away from our school. So here's some of the unfamiliar words that you might see today. We have sentimental, which is a feeling you get when you remember about nice things in the past, like a cozy feeling about Christmas or a nice birthday or a nice holiday. We have a stile, which is you have in place of a gate to go around the edge of a field or paddock so that you can climb over a fence easily, but so that the livestock can't break out. Lichen, which is a type of plant that grows on really old logs and stones as well, and often I'll see it in graveyards, which makes me think that lichen is a symbol that the author has used to build an atmosphere and an image of slight creepiness and old stuff. We've got some other words here. Crudely, which means roughly or badly, like roughly made or badly made. Your gait, which is how you walk. Do you have a gait with short steps or long steps, or do you swing your arms? This is the style of your walk. Feigned, which means acted or made up, pretended. Like a footballer might feign injury if they want to get a foul. Precarious, which means dangerous or risky. And that can be about a person doing something, or something like a bottle on the edge of a table is precarious because it might fall and break. This word, which looks a bit like brooch, but it's actually brooch, and that's like a posh badge that maybe someone who's a king or a queen might wear, and it's made of gold and got jewels on it. It looks very fancy, and you pin it to your suit or your dress. Prizing, which is a verb which means kind of wriggling something free that is stuck. Like when you've got a wobbly tooth, you're kind of trying to prise it out of your mouth, so levering it and wobbling it. A grappling hook, which is something you kind of throw on a rope at a building, so it clings on. You can kind of, it digs in because it's very sharp and kind of sticks in there, so you can climb up a building with it. Inexorably, which means something that is happening that is impossible to stop, often very slowly, like a massive ship crashing. It happens slowly, but there's just no way of stopping it. You just see it happening before your eyes. Rendering, which has a few different meanings, but in this story it means building an image, so imagining, and imagining something, how well you can imagine it. Reverie, which is a French word originally, which is to do with your thoughts or your dreams. And divergence, which is a separation or moving away from something. So those are some of the words, and they'll be highlighted in red when I read through the story. And this chapter is quite long, so I'm doing it in two parts. So I'll stop halfway through, and then there'll be a little recap at the end of the video, and then there'll be part two that you can carry straight on with, or you can read it, listen to it another day in the week. And what I'm thinking about today when I read is predicting where the scares are coming. So I've read lots of books, and lots of them have got scary bits and pieces in them. And from this one, we know is about a tree. And I know that doesn't sound very scary, but I know in Harry Potter there's a tree called the Whomping Willow, which has kind of got a spirit of its own, which is quite aggressive, and it'll hit you if it comes near it. And I also know in some other stories there are tree spirits that aren't very friendly. So perhaps I'm thinking this spooky story has got something to do with tree spirits at the moment, but I don't know anything about it before I've read it. So I'm just thinking about each time something happens, oh, is that where the scary thing is? And see if you can do some predicting as well as we go through. So I'm just going to share with you the story. There we go. So chapter 2, Climb Not. The garden was enclosed on all sides by a high stone wall that was splashed and speckled with yellow, grey and cream-white lichen. To the east, this wall housed tall gates of dark wood that opened onto a long gravel drive. To the west, the wall had a smaller opening. Set between two fiercely spiked shrubs was a scratched and weathered, arched bottle-green door with a heavy wrought iron hoop to lift the latch that held it shut. Beyond this door was a pasture of about 2 acres, bordered by the garden wall itself on one side, a hedge of hawthorn, hazel and dogwood on another, and a wooden post and rail fence on the other two. Almost in the centre of this pasture was an enormous and very ancient tree. Joseph's father had proudly pointed the tree out to him as he took Joseph on a tour of their magnificent new house and grounds. Joseph's father was not given to great shows of emotion, and seemed to save all his passion for his work, which Joseph did not fully understand, save that it was something to do with money and the making of money. But as he showed Joseph the tree, his father seemed unusually sentimental. He put his arm around Joseph, awkwardly but tenderly, and said, "Do you see that tree, son? The old elm? What a giant! Isn't it marvellous? It must be hundreds of years old. The things it must have seen, eh?" Joseph had to admit that the ancient elm really was rather marvellous. Standing there in the centre of the pasture, it looked like an animal in a paddock, or rather, like a zoo animal in its enclosure, penned, but not in any way tame. "I've got something for you," said his father. "I hope you like it." He handed Joseph a small blue box, which, when opened, revealed a shining gold pocket watch. "Oh," said Joseph, "is that really for me? Thank you, father." "Go on," he said with a smile. "Put it on. But don't lose it for God's sake. It was damned expensive." With a little help from his father, Joseph threaded the watch chain through the buttonhole of his waistcoat and tucked the watch into the pocket, where it ticked satisfyingly next to his ribs. Joseph's father went back to London the following day. He had rooms near the city and spent most of his time there, coming back to the house at weekends. Because Joseph was away himself at school, this arrangement did not usually affect him. But though he rarely missed his parents while at school, he was embarrassed to find himself holding back tears as he waved his father goodbye at the end of the drive. "Come on," said his mother, understanding something of the sadness in her son's eyes. "Let's take Jess for a walk." So Joseph, his mother and Jess, the family spaniel, set off through the garden gate and across the pasture. There was a stile at the bottom, leading onto a footpath across some common land and through a lovely wood of oaks and beech and sweet chestnut. The grass in the pasture had yet to be cut. It was long and blond, hissing with crickets and spattered with blood-red poppies. Towering up above it all was the mighty elm. Jess ran a zigzag, sniffing path, as she so often did, but today the tree seemed to demand her special attention. Joseph noticed for the first time that there was a cave-like hollow at the base of the tree, and it was this that particularly interested her. The spaniel sniffed the air and approached the hole cautiously, peering in, her ears alternately cocked for any noise and then held back against her head. Joseph could hear her whimpering quietly, as though she were mumbling under her breath. Joseph and his mother smiled as they watched Jess inching her way forward. Her ears suddenly cocked again, and she tilted her head to one side. She seemed to have heard a noise inside. She took a step forward and leaned tentatively into the hole. Suddenly, she gave a strange, strangled yelp that almost sounded like a human scream of panic. It was so startling in its oddness that Joseph and his mother both flinched. Jess jolted backwards from the tree and tore off across the pasture as if pursued by a demon. When she got to the garden door, she could not get through because the door was heavy and open outwards. She whined and howled and scrabbled at the door, scratching the wood and digging the earth beneath it in a frantic effort to escape. Joseph ran back, calling her name. When he reached her and tried to calm her down, she turned, wild-eyed, and bit him. Jess had never bitten Joseph, not even as a puppy, and he could see that she barely recognized him. She seemed to have no room in her mind for anything other than the overwhelming urge to escape. He opened the door for her, and she bolted, skidding on the gravel of the drive as she sped through the gates and away down the road. "It's all right, Joey," said his mother. "Don't worry. She'll come back." But she did not. It had been a long time since Joseph had cried, but he cried for Jess. Playing with her was one of the things he most looked forward to when he came home from school for the holidays. His mother said they must not give up hope, she would turn up safe and sound. He placed adverts in the local newspaper offering a reward, but heard nothing. When Joseph's father returned from London a week later, he took his son for a walk in the pasture. He told him that Jess might not come back, and were that to be the case, then they would get another dog. But Joseph did not want another dog. He wanted Jess. Joseph's father crouched down, looking into the hole at the tree's roots, and reached into it with his hand. "No!" said Joseph, with more force than he had intended. His father retracted his hand immediately. "What is it?" he said. There might be rats or something," said Joseph. In truth, he did not know why it had panicked him so to see his father put his hand into the hole. Though his father chuckled and ruffled his hair, he did not return to the hole, and asked Mr. Farlow, the gardener, to put poison down it. Joseph's father returned to London as he always did, and Joseph fidgeted about the house till his mother shooed him out. Eventually, he found himself in the pasture again, standing in front of the tree. The desire to climb the tree came suddenly, without any prior thought on the subject, but as soon as it did, the impulse was overwhelming. As he was looking for a way to begin, he noticed something written on the tree. "Climb not" had been crudely gouged into the bark, though it must have been many years ago, for the tree had healed around the wound of the words so that they were ancient scars in its elephant hide. This discovery, though interesting, did not detain Joseph for long. It clearly did not apply to him, as the writer and intended reader must be long dead. But no sooner had Joseph grabbed the very first branch than a voice behind him made him jump. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." It was old Mr. Farlow. "Heed what's writ there." "What?" said Joseph. "I know you read it, lad," he said. "I saw you. Heed it." "I'm not scared," said Joseph. "I've climbed lots of trees." "Not this one. You know what they say about elms, don't you, boy?" said the old man with an unpleasant smile. "Elms hateth man, and waiteth, so keep away." Joseph turned and stomped away back towards the house and sulked for several hours, refusing to give his mother any clue as to what was bothering him. That night he watched from his bedroom window as the crown of the elm tree shook like the mane of a giant lion, black against the indigo night, roaring in the wind. Joseph would show that old fool. By asking his mother a succession of apparently innocent questions over breakfast the next day, Joseph discovered that Mr. Farlow did not come to work on the gardens on Thursdays. That was 2 days away, and Joseph awaited the arrival of Mr. Farlow's day off as keenly as if it had been both Christmas Day and his own birthday rolled into one. His excitement surprised him, frightened him even, but he seemed to have no choice but to give in to it. On Thursday afternoon he dashed out of the house unnoticed, ran all the way to the elm, and stood gasping for breath in its shadow. After gazing up into the branches above him, he set about climbing. Joseph quickly discovered that the tree was going to be harder to climb than he had expected. This only made the climbing of it more of an adventure. Even when he missed his footing and slipped, scraping his knee on the grizzled bark and almost falling, he felt the pain to be a sign of his commitment to the climb. He reached a branch about 30 feet from the ground and could find no way of continuing. He tried to reach a branch above him, but looking down, he lost his nerve and could go no further. He took out his new watch. It was getting late. Reluctantly, Joseph climbed down, trying to retrace his route, vowing to return the following Thursday to continue the climb. He jumped the last few feet, landing with a soft thud on the ground. As he landed, he had the strangest impression that there was a muffled echo of his landing, that something beneath the earth had flinched or flexed. The hole at the tree's base seemed darker and more impenetrable than ever. He took 2 tentative steps forward, leaning to peer in, but found that he could not make himself go closer. He walked back across the pasture with a carefree gait that was completely feigned. In reality, he was resisting an impulse to run. He was almost at the door in the wall when he turned round quickly, half expecting to see something, he did not know what, standing behind him. There was nothing there but the tree. The following Thursday, his mother had invited some of the ladies from her watercolour class for coffee, and Joseph had to say hello to them all and smile and be cooed at before he could make his escape. The day was dull and overcast, but the feathery grey clouds were high and would not bring rain. Joseph was the only thing moving as he strode purposefully across the open pasture towards the tree. Joseph edged past the hole without looking in and began his climb. He was surprised at how easy he found it this time, as he quickly scaled the height he had reached the previous week. When he reached the branch that marked the highest point of his earlier climb, he straddled it and sat feeling content and looking about him for signs of where he might find footholds for the next stage. He looked at his watch. It was only 11 o'clock. He had plenty of time. It was then that he caught sight of the writing. There, scratched into the trunk of the tree, where the branch he was sitting on sprung away from it, were the words, "Climb not." They had been scratched into the bark in exactly the same way as the ones at the base of the tree, but these appeared to be freshly made. Joseph stared at them and, suddenly feeling as if he were being watched, he looked about him, out across the pasture. There was no one there. Mr. Farlow must have done this. Joseph was sure of it. The old man had warned him off climbing the tree after all, but could he really have climbed the tree at his age, however easy Joseph had found it? Joseph suddenly laughed to himself. Of course! The old man did not need to climb. He had a ladder. Joseph had seen him at the top of a ladder the week before, pruning a climbing vine on the garden wall. Then Joseph became angry. How dare that old man tell him what he could do and could not do? What concern was it of his? He did not own this land. Joseph did, or at least his parents did, and that amounts to the same thing after all. Instead of the words on the tree putting Joseph off, they became a spur for him to renew his struggles with even greater effort. Joseph looked at the lettering of the words and smiled smugly. Why, the old fool could barely write. Joseph could have made a better job of that when he was 4 years old. And what had he used to make the letters anyway? Joseph had seen and admired the old man's knife that he kept in a sheath on his belt, but these words seemed to have been scratched with a nail or a hook rather than cut with a blade, as they were rough and jagged. Joseph felt the letters with his fingers. Whatever he had used, it was certainly sharp, for the scratches were deep and the wood was as hard as stone. And we'll stop there for now, so it doesn't get too long. So just thinking quickly back to predicting where the scares are coming, I'll just run through some of the places where I thought. I started by thinking that maybe there was some sort of spirit that was evil in the tree itself, but that did change as I went along. It changed when Jess, the spaniel, the dog, went mad and ran off because she sniffed something in the hole, and it seemed like she heard something down there. And maybe it was some sort of evil being or spirit that lived down there, and it kind of sent her mad, almost possessed her. I thought maybe that's what the scary thing in this story is. And then we saw the writing, which was crudely carved into the wood, and I thought, well, maybe that's some sort of like clawed beast or clawed someone with a sharp instrument that's carved it in there to warn people away, something guarding the tree, something perhaps that is linked to that hole. And that feeling was confirmed when we saw the fresh writing just at the point where Joseph had climbed to the previous week, because that made me think something knew that he'd been there and was warning him not to go back, warning him to stay away. And I feel like Joseph probably isn't going to listen to that and he's going to carry on. And I don't feel like it's going to be a good decision. But we'll find out about that in our next session.